Can you imagine inheriting land from your parents only to find out it was sold years before their death?
Oh, wow.
That's the situation in a recent Philippine Supreme Court case that has gone viral.
Really?
Yeah, it's a wild one.
I can imagine.
We're going to unpack the case of Dela Cruz v. Dumasig. It's GR-No 261491, and it was decided on December 4th, 2023.
Okay.
And this case involves a land dispute among siblings and a third party.
Mm.
But there's a twist. It all started as a straightforward property sale, and then the Supreme Court stepped in, and things got really interesting.
I'm intrigued. So what happened?
Well, to understand this case, we really need to dig into this concept in Philippine law called action revindicatoria.
Right. So that's essentially an action to recover ownership and possession of property.
Exactly. And that's exactly what's at the heart of this case.
Got it. So tell me more about this Dela Cruz family. What's their story?
All right, so we start with the parents, Iniego and Sylvester Dela Cruz.
Okay.
They owned a piece of agricultural land. But like many families, sometimes they hit a financial rough patch.
That's understandable.
And they ended up mortgaging the land.
Okay.
Unfortunately, they fell behind on the mortgage payments.
Oh, no. That's never a good situation. So what did they do?
Well, that's where their daughter, Rosalinda, comes in.
Okay.
It seems like she stepped in to help her parents and paid off the loan.
That's nice of her. A real act of family support.
Yeah, you would think so.
So what happened next?
Well, after the loan was paid off, the bank returned the land title to the parents.
Okay.
And then they gave that title to Rosalinda.
Mm-hmm.
Then a deed of sale was executed, seemingly transferring the ownership of the land to Rosalinda.
So on paper, it looks like Rosalind is the new owner.
Right.
But you said there's a twist.
Oh, yeah, but big one. Even after this supposed sale, the parents continued to live on the land.
Mm-hmm.
They continued farming it.
Really?
And get this, they even remortgaged the land to someone else.
Wow. Wait, if they sold the land to Rosalinda, why would they do that?
That's a great question, and it's one of the big red flags that the siblings noticed too.
That does seem like a pretty big contradiction.
Right. So fast forward, the parents pass away,
Okay.
and Rosalinda mortgages the land again.
To someone else.
Yeah. This time to a man named Alejandro Dumasig.
Mm-hmm.
And it's at this point that Rosalinda's siblings discover what's been going on.
I see where this is going.
Yeah, they were not happy, and they decided to take legal action.
Makes sense. So they basically filed an action revindicatoria claiming the land was rightfully theirs.
Exactly. They argued that the original sale to Rosalinda was never actually valid,
Mm-hmm.
which would then mean her subsequent mortgage to Dumasig is also invalid.
So they're saying, hey, this land is ours and we want it back.
Exactly.
So what did the lower courts say about all of this?
Well, it went back and forth.
Oh, really?
Yeah. The trial court initially sided with the siblings,
Oh, yeah.
declared them co-owners of the land, and said that that sale to Rosalinda was void.
So round one goes to the siblings.
You could say that.
Yeah.
But then the Court of Appeals stepped in and reversed that decision.
Oh, wow.
They upheld the sale to Rosalinda and her subsequent mortgage to Dumasig.
So it's like legal ping pong at this point.
Exactly.
So it all comes down to the Supreme Court. What did they have to decide?
The central issue was the validity of that original deed of sale.
Between Rosalinda and her parents.
Right.
Did the parents really intend to sell the land to their daughter, or was there something else going on?
Right. Was it a legitimate transaction, or was it, as the siblings alleged, just a way to maybe protect the land from creditors?
That's a big question. And I bet the answer has a lot to do with family trust and the whole idea of legal agreements.
Exactly. So what did the Supreme Court decide?
I can't wait to hear this.
Well, in a decision that really set off a lot of discussion online, the Supreme Court ultimately sided with the siblings.
No way. They overturned the Court of Appeals.
They did. They basically declared that that sale to Rosalinda was not valid.
Wow. So they agreed that something wasn't right with that initial sale. I'm dying to know their reasoning.
Well, we're going to dive into all of that right after the break. Stay tuned, because this is where it gets really good. All right, so the Supreme Court sided with the siblings and said that that sale to Rosalinda was no good.
Right.
But they went even deeper with their legal reasoning, and it gets really interesting.
Okay.
So can you break down some of those key legal concepts that they used in their decision?
Sure. One of the big ones the Supreme Court leaned on was this idea of absolute simulation.
Absolute
Yeah.
simulation. That
Okay.
sounds like something out of a sci-fi movie.
I know, right? But it's actually a pretty straightforward legal idea.
Okay, so for our listeners who aren't lawyers, break it down. What exactly is absolute simulation, and how did it play into this case?
So basically, absolute simulation means that a contract, like the deed of sale in this case, exists on paper.
Okay.
But the people involved, they never really intended to actually be bound by it.
Oh, so it's like a fake out.
Pretty much. It's like they're trying to create this appearance of a transaction,
Okay.
but there's no real substance behind it.
So it's all for show.
Yeah, exactly.
Got it.
Hmm.
So how did the Supreme Court see this absolute simulation, in this case, with the Dela Cruzes?
Well, they pointed to a couple of things, like the parents continuing to live on the land even after the sale,
Right.
and then remortgaging it to someone else.
Mm-hmm.
Those actions really contradict the whole idea that they had actually sold the property to Rosalinda.
Right. It's like they said, okay, fine, we'll sign this paper, but we're still going to act like we own this land.
Exactly.
But then wouldn't that raise some red flags right away? Like, why would anyone go along with that?
Well, you have to think about how families work. There's often a lot of trust,
Yeah.
unspoken agreements.
Right.
Things work a little differently than just straight up business deals.
Okay.
So maybe in this case, the parents thought they had some kind of understanding with Rosalinda.
Mm-hmm.
You know, maybe they were thinking she knows this isn't a real sale. It's just temporary.
Right.
But as we can see now, that can really backfire
Yeah.
when you rely on unspoken agreements and then you end up in court.
Especially with something as big as land.
Exactly.
This is why it's so important to have clear communication,
Yes.
get everything in writing.
Absolutely.
So it's not just about family dynamics, though. This
Correct.
case also brings in the whole issue of land ownership in the Philippines
Right.
and agrarian reform.
Exactly. The Supreme Court didn't just stop at absolute simulation.
Okay.
They also brought in this other key legal thing,
Mhm.
Presidential Decree 27.
Okay, PD 27. What's so important about that? How does that fit into this whole land dispute?
So PD 27 is all about land reform.
Okay.
It's about trying to get land ownership into the hands of the farmers who are actually working the land.
Mm-hmm.
This is huge in the Philippines, where land ownership has historically been very concentrated,
Right.
like a small group of people owning most of the land.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a law that tries to make things a bit more fair.
Level the playing field a little bit.
Exactly. And one of the ways it does that is by making it harder to transfer land that was acquired through these agrarian reform programs.
So that it doesn't just end up back in the hands of wealthy landowners.
Exactly.
Right back where it started.
Yeah, and that's where Rosalinda ran into trouble.
Okay.
Because the land in question had originally been acquired through an agrarian reform program.
Oh, so even if that sale had been totally legitimate,
Right.
still would have been against the law.
Exactly, because of the history of that specific piece of land.
Wow. So PD 27 really acts as a safeguard
Yeah, you could say that.
to protect those original goals of the agrarian reform.
Exactly. And this is why the Supreme Court's decision is so significant, because it protects the siblings' inheritance rights.
Right.
But it also reinforces how important PD 27 is for
Yeah.
protecting those bigger goals of land reform in the Philippines.
Wow. This is like a reminder that property laws aren't just these abstract ideas.
Right.
They have real consequences. They can be a tool for social change.
For sure. And this case really shows that.
So for our listeners who might not be super familiar with Philippine law, what are some of the key takeaways from this case?
I think the biggest thing is just knowing your rights when it comes to property, understanding your obligations.
Right.
Because even simple transactions between family members can have these big unintended legal consequences.
Absolutely.
So if you're ever unsure about anything,
Yeah.
get legal advice. Talk to a professional.
Right. It's a good reminder that this whole situation could have maybe been avoided if the Dela Cruz family had gone to a lawyer earlier on.
Right. Who knows? Maybe a lawyer could have helped them talk through those complex emotions,
Right.
figure out the legal stuff
Yeah.
in a way that protected everyone.
Yeah. This is like a classic example of why you don't want to just rely on good intentions.
Right.
Sometimes families can get into these legal messes,
Absolutely.
especially with something like inheritance. Okay, so we've talked about absolute simulation and PD 27, but there's another legal concept that we haven't mentioned yet
Oh, right.
that's woven throughout this whole case.
Yeah.
The basis of the siblings' legal claim. Remind us about that.
You're talking about action reivindicatoria.
Yes.
That's that legal action to get your property back.
Right.
It's a big deal in property law, and it's what the siblings use to fight their case.
It's not enough to just say, hey, that's mine.
Nope.
You need to have a legal argument.
Exactly.
So to win an action reivindicatoria case, you have to prove that you have a stronger claim to that property
Yes.
than whoever has it now.
Exactly.
And in this case, the siblings were able to do that
Right.
by showing that the sale to Rosalinda was a fake.
Mm-hmm.
So that knocked down her claim,
Right.
and then Dumasig's claim, too.
Yeah, it's like dominoes.
Yeah.
Once you knock down that first domino,
Right.
everything else falls.
Exactly. You need to build your legal argument on solid ground.
Yes, exactly like building a house.
Yeah.
If your foundation is weak,
Right.
the whole thing could fall apart.
That's a good analogy. So in this case, the siblings built their case carefully,
Mm-hmm.
and they got their land back.
Right. It's a win for them. And a win for the idea that even in these tough cases
Right.
with family and property, the legal system can actually deliver justice.
It's really cool to see how these legal concepts play out in real life,
I agree.
especially in a case that's so emotional.
Yeah, definitely.
I'm sure our listeners are starting to see just how high the stakes are in these kinds of disputes.
For sure.
I'm curious, what are your thoughts on how this case might impact future legal decisions,
No, that's interesting.
especially when it comes to land disputes and agreements within families?
I think this case is going to be really important for future cases that are similar.
Mm.
It shows how important clear communication is.
Right.
Getting those legal documents in order
Mm.
and understanding the ins and outs of property law,
Right.
especially in the context of agrarian reform.
Yeah.
And it also shows the role of the courts in making sure those laws actually work
Right.
and protecting the rights of people who have been wronged.
It's amazing how one case can touch on so many parts of the law and society.
I agree.
I think our listeners are seeing that now.
Yeah, they're getting the big picture.
Okay, so we've covered a lot today unpacking this Dela Cruz v. Dumasig case.
It's a good one.
But before we wrap things up completely,
Okay.
I want to take a step back
Mm-hmm.
and think about something that everyone can connect with.
Oh, okay.
Family.
Right.
At its heart, this case is about a family
Yeah.
trying to figure out this inheritance,
Mm-hmm.
dealing with all the emotions that come with it. It's easy to get lost in the legal stuff,
Right.
but we can't forget about the human side of this. Imagine the conversations that must have happened within this family,
Oh, yeah.
the parents' intentions,
Mm-hmm.
Rosalinda's role,
Right.
what the siblings expected.
Yeah.
It's probably a story that a lot of families can relate to.
Especially in the Philippines,
Mhm.
where land is so connected to family history and identity.
Exactly. It reminds us that even with good intentions, things can go wrong,
You're sure.
especially with inheritance. So talking to each other openly,
Yes.
communicating clearly,
Absolutely.
and even getting legal advice can help families get through these tough situations.
Yeah, and protect everyone's interests.
Okay, so we've looked at the legal details,
Right.
the family dynamics,
Yeah.
the bigger picture of what this means for society. If our listeners could take away just 3 key things from this whole conversation, what would they be?
Okay, so first I'd say remember that you have options. If you think you have a right to some property, you can take legal action.
Right.
Don't be afraid to get some advice and see what you can do.
Second,
Yeah.
really understand those restrictions on land ownership that are in Presidential Decree number 27.
Especially in the Philippines.
Right. Knowing how that law works can save you a lot of trouble later on.
Exactly.
And third, and maybe this is the most important,
I don't know.
when it comes to inheritance within families,
Yeah.
talk to each other.
Yeah.
Be clear about everything.
Right.
Get those agreements in writing.
Yes.
Having those tough conversations could prevent so many disputes
I agree.
and make sure everyone's rights are protected.
Absolutely.
This has been a really interesting deep dive
Yeah, a lot to unpack.
into this land dispute case.
Mm-hmm.
And I hope our listeners are feeling a little more knowledgeable
Great.
and maybe even inspired to have some of those important conversations
Yes.
with their own families.
To sure.
Before we sign off, though, I want to leave our listeners with one final thought.
Okay.
This case was all about whether that sale was legal,
All right.
but what about the ethics of it all?
Oh, that's interesting.
Is it ever okay to challenge what your parents want to do with their property?
Mm-hmm.
Even if you think it's unfair,
Right.
it's tough.
Yeah.
No easy answers.
Definitely not.
So let us know what you think down in the comments.
And if you enjoyed this deep dive into Philippine land law and family drama,
Be sure to subscribe to The Deep Dive.
we've got a lot more legal cases coming your way.
They bring all sorts of interesting topics.
From intellectual property to environmental law.
We break it all down,
Make it
being
engaging.
easy to understand.
We love making the law accessible to everyone.
So we can't wait to share more of these deep dives with you.
Until then, stay curious
Stay informed.
and keep learning.
So we spent all this time talking about this case, Dela Cruz v. Dumasig.
It's a big one.
It really shows how complicated land ownership can be.
Especially in the Philippines.
Yeah, and how family promises don't always line up with the law.
Right. Sometimes things get messy.
It's a good reminder that those clear legal agreements are so important.
Yeah, even within families.
So I'm curious what stood out to you the most about this whole case.
I think for me, it was just how this one simple land sale
Right.
led to all these complex legal questions.
Yeah, we talked about absolute simulation,
Right.
presidential decree,
Rep.
20.
And then you find all these complications.
We've covered a lot of legal ground today,
Mm-hmm.
but I want to take a step back for a second
Yeah.
and think about the family aspect of all this.
Yeah, at the end of the day, this is a family dealing with inheritance.
Right. And all the emotions that come with that.
It's easy to focus on the laws and the arguments,
Mm-hmm.
but we can't forget about the human side of things.
Right.
These are real people.
Imagine those conversations within the family.
Oh, yeah.
What were the parents really thinking?
Right. What was Rosalinda's role in all of this?
And what did the siblings expect was going to happen?
It's a story that I bet resonates with a lot of families out there.
Especially in the Philippines, where land is so tied to family history and tradition.
For sure, it's a reminder that even when everyone has good intentions,
Right.
things can still get really complicated.
Especially with inheritance.
Yeah, those family dynamics can be tough.
So what can families do to avoid these kinds of situations?
Well, I think communication is key. Open and honest conversations about everyone's expectations
Right.
and maybe even seeking legal advice early on.
Right, getting that professional perspective.
Exactly. It can save a lot of heartache down the road.
So we've talked about the legal ins and outs,
Mm-hmm.
the family dynamics,
Right.
and the big picture impact of this case.
Yeah, we went deep.
If our listeners could take away just 3 key things from this whole conversation, what would those be?
Okay, let me think. I would say first remember that you have legal options if you think you have a right to property.
Okay, good one.
Like, don't be afraid to explore those options and talk to a lawyer.
Second.
Second, I'd say understand how Presidential Decree 9027 works.
Right.
It's so important in the Philippines for land ownership.
Absolutely.
Knowing those rules can help you avoid problems.
And third?
Third, and this might be the most important, communicate clearly within your family.
Yeah.
Especially when it comes to inheritance.
Mm-hmm.
Have those tough conversations.
Yeah.
Get those agreements in writing.
Yeah, protect yourselves.
Exactly. It's better to be safe than sorry.
Well said. I think those are some really great takeaways.
Thanks.
This has been a fascinating deep dive
Yeah, it's been fun.
into this land dispute case.
Lots to learn.
And I hope our listeners are feeling a little more informed.
And empowered.
Yeah. And maybe even ready to have those important conversations with their own families.
For sure.
Before we go, though, I want to leave everyone with one last thing to think about.
Okay.
This case focused on whether that sale was actually legal,
Mm-hmm.
but what about the ethical side of things?
Ooh, that's interesting.
Like, is it ever right to go against what your parents want to do with their property?
Mm-hmm.
Even if you think it's unfair?
Right.
It's a tough question.
Yeah, no easy answers.
So let us know your thoughts down in the comments.
We'd love to hear what you think.
And if you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe to The Deep Dive,
We've got more legal cases coming your way.
exploring all sorts of interesting topics
From intellectual property.
to environmental law.
We break it all down for you.
Make it engaging and easy to understand.
We believe that everyone should be able to understand the law.
So join us for our next deep dive.
We can't wait to see you there.
Until then, stay curious
Stay informed.
and keep learning.